Hello and welcome back. Video might be just a touch late, but I'm gonna do it anyway, and I'm gonna do like a fun twist on it too. So I know some people enjoy doing like the 25 books in 2025 or whatever year it is. Basically, I kind of want to do that and talk about 25 books that I'm planning on reading or that I want to read, and like this is the year to do it. A lot of the books will be on my physical TBR because, as we know, I'm trying to tackle that and get that much lower and like actually read than what it is currently. I'm gonna go through the 25 books that I want to read. I probably won't go into too much detail about each of these books. I'm gonna try to keep it kind of like rapid fire. It's gonna be like a 1-minute quick synopsis of the book, so you'll know like the genre, the author, basically the general premise of what it's about, but I don't want to spend too much time because otherwise this could be a super long video. Anyways, I just wanted to talk about the books that I'm most excited about, so let's dive in. Setting the timer, so you might hear the noise go off a few times. First book we're going to talk about is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett. This is like a cozy fantasy type book where we follow our main character, Emily Wilde, and she is like a researcher specifically focused on fairies. And this story follows her going to like this small town and interacting with the different people that live there that are fairies. And her academic rival Wendell is also in this town, and they're very different in their personalities, and they have to kind of work together but also work against each other, and there's a little bit of a romance mixed with a good amount of fantasy in this story. Second book on the list is an epic fantasy part of the Mistborn series, and that's Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson. This is the second book of Mistborn Part 1, so we're following our main character Vin, and she is what's known as a Mistborn, which she has the ability to not only consume metals, but she can consume all 12 metals or 11 metals that are in this lineup of different powers, whereas like other people have like specializations, and she has all the powers. She is very cool and fun to follow. This is book 2, following the aftermath of the crazy ending that was book 1, and I really enjoyed book 1 because it subverted a lot of my expectations in a way, and I'm excited to dive into the second story and see where things progress from there. Next on the list we have On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. This is a really short like literary fiction-esque book. I believe it's like epistolary in a sense, or it's supposed to be like this young boy, I believe he's from Vietnam, is writing letters to his mother who doesn't know how to read, and it's a very emotionally driven story where he's talking about the American experience from his perspective, you know, getting into anything that's like related to race and personal identity, those sorts of things. I've heard that the writing in this is absolutely beautiful. I will be reading it with my notebook open next to me and a bunch of tabs ready to go, and I am a sucker for anything that has very emotional, character-driven writing. Very excited about this. Next book on the list is a nominee from the Goodreads Choice Awards for the literary fiction category. This book is The Wedding People by, I believe it's Elizabeth Alsbach. I will put the name up here just so you can see it. But anyways, this book is described as this girl going to a resort where she's planning on offing herself, and she runs into the bride of the wedding that's happening at the same place, and so they get to talking, and the bride is like, oh, you're absolutely not doing that because it's my wedding weekend, how dare you, which sounds like a bizarre concept, but it's definitely a take on like mental health and finding purpose in your life, and I'm sure there's some other stuff that goes on in the book too. I've like avoided the spoilers as much as I could, which surprises me because everybody loved this book and it won the category for best literary fiction, so I want to know what all the hype is. Oh gosh, okay. Next up we have Imaginary Friend by Stephen Chbosky. If you don't know, Stephen Chbosky wrote The Perks of Being a Wallflower, which is one of my all-time favorite books ever, and this is a thick literary horror book. So from what I've gathered from the synopsis, and I'm still a little confused on it, even though I've been wanting to read this book for years, but we're following this mother and her son who move across the country because they're avoiding something from their past that I'm sure we'll find out about throughout the story. And once they get to this new area, they experience like her son gets lost in the woods, and then when he comes back he claims that he has like an imaginary friend, and they're navigating what that looks like and like the haunting of that. I'm pretty sure that's what we're dealing with, but it's supposed to be really, really interesting, I guess. So we'll see. Next is The Dragon Republic by R.F. Kuang. This is another high fantasy book, and this is another sequel. There are quite a few like sequels or like companion sort of novels on this list just because it's starting to get too far from when I've read the original one, but in the Poppy Wars series, we are following our main character, Rin, and she is exposed to like the world of shamanism at this military academy sort of thing, and she actually gets thrust into like war, her first like experience while she's there. So it's a really interesting story where they're like the power of gods that they can channel, and there's a lot of like political intrigue and things going on in here, and the story is just so interesting because it also has commentary on like opium and drugs and how that affects people and addiction. So we're following Rin after she makes a really crazy decision in book 1, and I love how chaotic of a main character she is. I'm excited to see what happens in this one. I do have a physical copy of this book, but I don't have it here because I was reading it out in the living room, and that's Babel by R.F. Kuang. I've wanted to read this book since it came out like a couple of years ago, but I'm about 50 pages into it right now, so hopefully that'll be in my February wrap-up. But this story is about language, following our main character, Robin, and Robin was plucked from his small village by white colonizers to study the language and to use like silver magic essentially, which not everybody can do from what I'm gathering. And he's brought to Oxford University to study different languages in order to use this magic, and it's going to be for like the personal gain of the guy who kind of takes him in. I don't know much else about the story other than that brief synopsis, but I'm excited to see another fantasy story that's like centered around different types of metal. This seems like this will be a very politically driven book, and it takes place like in England in like later okay. Well, anyways, it takes place like in England back in the day, and we'll go from there, okay? Another book that I want to read is another fantasy book. This is the year I get back into fantasy. I've called it from the beginning. I want to read The Will of the Many by James Islington, or Islington, however you say it, but I have not seen one negative review about this book. It has an insanely high Goodreads rating, and the way that this book is pitched is we have our like main character who's like lowest on the social totem pole, and he gets taken in by this mentor figure who wants him to collapse the system from the inside, and so the way that the magic system works is like a pyramid scheme or like multi-level marketing where people have this stuff called will, and you siphon your will from, or like you can siphon your will to give it to other people, or other people can siphon their will to give it to you, and like the higher it goes up, the more will that person has to control and to use. So of course the most powerful are on the top while the lowest stay on the bottom and impoverished. Next on the list is which would be my first Frederick Bachman book, which is kind of crazy to me considering what I like to read, but this would be Beartown. I've heard that Beartown follows like this high school hockey sports team, and is following the young boys as they deal with like the societal pressures of like performance and doing well for this town, and it follows after a traumatic event that happens like involving the team, and goes like along with like the town's reactions and everything from there. This sounds like it'll be a very interesting social commentary, and I know that some of the content warnings should be like approached before reading this story because of the traumatic event that happens, but I'm excited to read a Bachman book this year. This next book might be the book I'm most excited for. It's Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. This is a YA dystopian. It is a prequel to the Hunger Games trilogy, which is one of my favorite series of all time, and most people's probably favorite series of all time. But this book follows Haymitch, the mentor to Katniss and Peeta. It follows his Hunger Games, which is the 50th quarter quell, and like we got a little bit of information about what happened in his story in Catching Fire, but this is gonna be the full experience. I'm so unbelievably excited. This comes out in March, and I am going to be sitting ready for this book the day it comes out. I want to know what social commentary that Suzanne Collins is going to make. I think it's going to be about violence and the spectacle of violence, and I'm so excited to see what she has to say. Next on the list, we have another fantasy book. This is another Brandy Sandy book that made it onto the list. This is Tress of the Emerald Sea. This is part of his Cosmere series, but it's not like directly connected to anything. So this was one of his secret project books, and we're following our main character Tress, and she has to cross this sea of like spores. Like in the world there are like spores that fall from the sky, and if they like connect with water at all, it's bad news, okay? But we're following Tress as she has to rescue the love of her life and go on a perilous journey. I've heard that this book was written for his wife, which one is like the cutest thing I've ever heard, and two, this book is very much like The Princess Bride, so if you like Buttercup and the gang, you might also like this. I am really excited to jump into this and see how it compares to Brandon Sanderson's other stories. I love how he writes female characters, so hopefully this continues to be in the good department. Next up is a romance book that I am so beyond excited for because I think everybody can say that they love Abby Jimenez now after like the quality stories she's been putting out the last few years. I had 2 of her books on my favorites of 2024, but Say You'll Remember Me is the book that I'm looking forward to. It's coming out in April, and in this story we're following our main character, who I don't know the name of, but she goes on a date with this guy, and it goes really well from what I've gathered, but she can't go on another date because of life complications, and so they decide to call it off, but like they keep remembering each other and feel drawn back to each other. And I love a story that centers yearning. You give me yearning and characters who can't stop thinking about each other. Oh, it sounds like it's going to be absolutely fantastic. I'm purposely going in just a little vague because I want to be swept away by the story. Next on the list is a YA book from one of my favorite authors. So Neil Shusterman just came out with All Better Now, and this book is vaguely reminiscent of COVID, but the virus in this book is centered around happiness. So I wonder like what kind of commentary it's going to be on like depression and mental health and things, but essentially we're in this dystopian world where if you're infected with a virus, you turn like happy and compliant and complacent with life, and you don't question anything anymore. So there's like you're just blissfully ignorant, unaware of the world, but you're living happily in your best life. So it's either choose that or be aware of things, be critical of things, and I think that this story is really prevalent for right now in the world too, with how many things are going on in the world and what you choose to engage with what you choose to ignore and dissociate from. But I'm really excited to see because Neil Shusterman's worlds are super interesting and his commentary is very interesting too. Sorry, I could talk about him so much. Next on the list is another anticipated read that I will be reading this year, and that is Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This might be the book I'm most excited for in her collection because I went through a phase in elementary school where I was obsessed with space, as every girl should. But Atmosphere takes place in the 1980s, and it's like a retelling of like the Challenger space mission situation, which sounds like a really interesting thing to talk about because we know how that ends. But I love stories where we know what the final result is, but we're figuring out the clues along the way. So I'm really excited to see like what kind of perspective she has to bring to this story, and I just love the way that her writing is and the way that she tells like time period things. Oh my gosh, like it always feels like you're transported back in time or like watching a documentary. Taylor Jenkins Reid knows what she's doing, and I'm excited. Okay, I've actually read this book. I read it in January, but I'll just mention it again here. What My Bones Know by Stephanie Fu. I got to mark it off on my little list already, but this is a really great memoir. Read all of the trigger warnings, go in prepared, but this follows Stephanie Fu's life story where she talks about her familial trauma, generational trauma, and her diagnosis of complex PTSD. She was abused mentally, physically, every form you could think of as a child, and it's her story of, you know, dealing with that, coming to terms that she has to grieve a life that she's never had, and then what her future looks like beyond that. This is deeply emotional, but also like darkly funny because Stephanie Fu's writing is actually incredible, and I really, respect that she approached this story with such grace, and she was so vulnerable with all of the things that she shared throughout this novel. This is one of the best memoirs I've read, and I do highly recommend it. Next, we have a book that I'm gonna hopefully read in February. This is The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. And so this book follows a group of old people in a retirement home who love crime. Like, be old, do crime, you know? It's a great time. But they get together to solve different cold cases and to like share facts and try to figure out who done it. And there's actually a case that happens in the town that they live in, I'm pretty sure. And so they put all their brains together and they're like, what if we were the ones that solved this? Which I love that. I love a good mystery story that has like friendship and like camaraderie at the center of it. And this is a series, so this is the first book in the series, and I'm hoping that I enjoy this one and I can eventually get to the next 3 in the series as well. Next we have another book that's pretty relevant to things going on in the world, and that's Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler. This book actually takes place in like the current timeline that we're living in, which is like 2024 is when it starts. But we're following our main character as she's dealing with a lot of like social change. There's a climate crisis that's going on, and it's kind of her life in this dystopian world. I believe there's a lot of commentary on like women's rights and like climate change as a whole, the environment, the political status of the world. I just really want to read this year so that I can have a greater understanding not only of Octavia E. Butler's writing, but of you know, the complexities of the world around us. The best part about this is that this book was like written like 40 years ago. I think it was like either written in the 80s or the 90s, and I want to see how much they got right. Like, and that's really, really unsettling to think about. Next up, we'll talk about Betty by Tiffany McDaniel. This is a book that I discovered because of Lexi Newly Nova on her channel, and I love her content. She said this was one of the best books that she read in the year that she did, and it's an indigenous story following our main character by the name of Betty, and it's dealing with her complex like family dynamics and her life story living in a family where it seems like she can't stand out. So I'm really interested to see what happens, and also the fact that this book takes place in Ohio. Now that I'm looking at the bag is even crazier, but it talks about like the intersection of poverty and violence and just things along those lines. This is a really bad description, but I really want to read this book, and I'm excited to see what commentary it brings to the table. Next on the list is a book not many people have heard of, and that is The Steel Crow Saga by Paul Kruger. I think this is the only book that this author currently has out, but the blurb on the front says that it is a combination of Pokemon meets Avatar: The Last Airbender, which are 2 of my favorite things ever. So I had to see what this book was about. So in this world, I've read like the first 100 pages of this like years ago, back when I was in college. In this world, we're following people who have the ability to like tame the spirits of animals, and then they can kind of like use them as they need to, but it's like a bond with an animal. And usually you can only like connect or bond to like one animal. So I remember like the scenes with this girl trying to figure out what animal she wants to bond to, and there's like a murderous chicken. Like, why? I don't know, but like I just remembered that part specifically. But I want to dive back into this because it was also a very like political and diverse story too, so I am looking forward to revisiting. Now we're going to talk about a book that's been described as like thriller, little mix of like literary fiction and historical fiction, that sort of vibe. But I want to see where I land with this book, and that is The God of the Woods by Liz Moore. So this story is like campy in a sense, where it takes place in like the 70s or 80s, I think, and we're following these teenagers that disappear, and then it's a search from the surrounding community to like figure out what happened when they went into these woods. And I don't think there's like a paranormal aspect to this story or anything, but it's like more of a family drama and like navigating the complex relationships that follow the people connected to those who disappeared. So I'm really curious to see where this goes, but it was like the mystery thriller Goodreads Choice Award winner, I'm pretty sure, which is really cool. So there's that's like what the second or third one that was mentioned on this list for Goodreads Choice, so we'll see what I think of that. Now we're going to talk about Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. This book is like a magical, like literary story. I don't think it's quite like Greek mythology, but it feels like reading a Greek myth. So in this story, we follow our main character Piranesi, and they live in, or they don't live in this house, they're put in this house and they're trying to figure out like where things start and stop and like what's true, and there's like another person that they're communicating with to try to figure it out. I believe the story is also kind of like epistolary in nature too, so it's told in like short letter snippets. But yeah, we're trying to figure out what's going on with this house and this labyrinth and what the story is unfolding after that. I've heard that the writing is absolutely beautiful, and this did win the Women's Prize for Fiction in 2021, so I'm hoping that I enjoy this story. Talk about another book that I've already read. So I just finished this book actually, so you'll get to see it in my February wrap-up, but this is Welcome to the Human Bookshop, and it's by Hwang Bo-rim. So this story is so deeply emotional. We follow our main character Youngju as she opens a bookstore because it's always been a dream of hers, and she's always loved reading, and she grows very tired of the life that like society's been telling her to live. And so she's like, since I only have one life, it's too short to be miserable, I'm gonna do what I want to do. So she opens this bookshop, and it comes along with a lot of like anxiety and uncertainty, but she starts to feel the pressure lift away after she starts building connections with the people that she works with, the people that she invites to the bookstore, and like the customers that are coming in and telling her such wonderful things. So this story is definitely more about the vibes than like the plot. There isn't an intense plot, but it's deeply emotional and the characters are very sweet. It's good, trust me. This is the last book that I have a physical copy of, and I actually have a signed copy, which is kind of cool. So I have the Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green. I have a love-hate relationship with Mr. John Green. It's one of those things where I didn't really love a lot of his YA books as much. Like the only one that I like enjoyed was Turtles All the Way Down. And I actually want to reread that book because of the representation in it. But this is unlike most things that he's written. This is a collection of like essays where he picks like 5 different random objects to talk about. Like, I think there's one where he talks about sunsets versus sunrises. There's one where he talks about Canadian geese. It's random things like that. But it's just like his literary ramblings on those things, and he's reviewing them from a like deeply human and critical lens. This is like my coworker's favorite book of all time, so I want to be able to have like an engaging conversation with her. But the front says Essays on a Human-Centered Planet. So I'm excited to see what his observations are, and I hope I like this more than the YA stuff. 2 more books. Next one we have is the only horror book I think on this list, even though I do want to read more horror because I find it fascinating. But that book is Mary by Nat Cassidy. I read Nestlings last year, and then also Nat Cassidy has a new book coming out, so I want to read the other book in his catalog. So Mary is a horror focusing on like a middle-aged woman going through menopause, but a lot of the stuff manifests in like horrific senses where she like looks in the mirror and her face starts to melt off and she feels like she's on like the verge of a psychotic break like most of the time, but all the doctors are telling her like, oh, it's just menopause, don't worry about it. Oh, to be a woman in the healthcare system. So I just want to read the book because of that commentary, the commentarying on like women and aging, and I really enjoyed Nat Cassidy's last book and the way that he writes women. So I want to go into this book hopefully feeling satisfied like I did with the last one. And the last book we're going to talk about is Emily Henry's new book coming out, and that is Great Big Beautiful Life. We are following 2 characters who are trying to write about the same famous person. So they're kind of like competing for that person's attention in order to tell the story of a lifetime. And I don't know much about the 2 characters. Like I've tried to like stay away from the synopses of like romance books, and I'm trying to just go in and enjoy them. But I love Emily Henry's writing style because she always has like deeply emotionally I'm always deeply emotionally invested in the characters. That's what I was trying to say. Like, I loved Happy Place so much, and I really hope that this book has the same kind of like feeling and like your attachment to the characters like I did in that one. I did pre-order the Kindle copy, so I will have it on the day of release. Very excited. Okay, so these are 25 of the books that I want to read this year, and a lot of them I physically own, so hopefully we can get through my bookshelf quicker and sooner rather than later. But I'm curious to know what book you want to read in 2025, if any of these would be on your list, or which one I should prioritize out of the list of all the good books that I have. Thank you for spending some time with me. Subscribe if you want to below, but I appreciate a like and a comment any day of the week. Also, I am Pages and Pastimes on Instagram if you want to follow me, and also on Goodreads too. So there's that, and then I also have a Webtoon comic with one of my best friends. We're both aspiring authors, and he's a great illustrator. It's called Tales of Grandeur. It is linked in my bio. I'll link it in the description. If you want to go read that and support, that would be fantastic. But have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!